Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Ray. I'm a detransition male, and today I want to talk about how the internet is causing the modern crisis of transgenderism in men today. Because I've talked a lot about on my channel the theory of Dr. Ray Blanchard talking about how autogynephilia, love of oneself as a woman, is the primary motivating cause of gender dysphoria in men. And this is defined technically as the being aroused at the thought or image of oneself as a woman, or having the predisposition to being aroused at the thought or image of oneself as a woman. But if you go back, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, before the rise of the internet, it was only the AGPs, only the autogynephiles who had severe anatomical autogynephilia. Because autogynephilia, even though it's connected to this inversion of your sexuality, it can generate intense dislike of your male anatomy. And 40, 50 years ago, the only men who would be able to bypass the gatekeeping system to access transition and surgeries and hormones were the men who had severe anatomical dysphoria. In other words, their AGP had to be very, very severe. But today, we are seeing a totally different cohort of AGPs transition. And for these AGPs, which I consider myself part of, it's really a response to the internet, particularly the way in which the modern internet and the pornography seen on the modern internet creates what's called a super stimulus, a stimulus that's more exciting than anything that can be found in the natural world. Something that generates so much dopamine in the brain that it starts instantly rewiring the brain. Just like if you hit crack cocaine or meth or something like this, it just instantly generates a massive flood of dopamine and it starts instantly rewiring the brain. You cannot be a recreational user of those drugs because it rewires the brain so completely with just massive flood of dopamine. It just causes almost like instant addiction. We might call this rapid onset addiction. And many of these young men, including myself, were exposed to pornography at a very young age. I was exposed to pornography when I was probably 10 years old. And that was being exposed to it in dirty mags that I found in the woods or something, on dial-up modems, downloading one picture took a minute. Whereas nowadays with, broadband internet and 4K, resolution and all this stuff, these streaming platforms, and it's all free, and there's so much extreme fetishistic content. And this is the environment that men are growing up in. And this is causing massive amounts of dopamine addiction. This is just ruining men's minds, melting their minds, causing this extreme sex addiction, basically. And so you take this modern digital environment and you throw in transgender pornography, she-male pornography, all these things. And even more insidiously, the most modern form of this, the most extreme version, is something called sissy hypnosis pornography, which is incredibly common. It's very common. It's all over Reddit. It's all over Twitter. It's even on TikTok, believe it or not. Even on TikTok, there are all these sissy accounts and all this stuff. It's everywhere. And men are falling for this. They're being sucked into it. Look at Chris Tyson, the Mr. Beast guy. Very clear that this is a case of rapid onset autogynephilia caused by some kind of porn addiction, sex addiction, this runaway escalation of a paraphilia. And it just takes a man who otherwise did not have a lot of dysphoria growing up, did not have that intense, severe anatomical dysphoria about their body. They never grew up having this intense hatred of their body. But they did get exposed to these super stimuli, these pornographic environments, and they get addicted. And that's what happened to me. It started off with just this innocent, fetish for, stockings and pantyhose. When I was a very young boy, I would, steal stockings out of my, mother's trash can when she threw them away. And it slowly escalated. And then I discovered, pornography on the internet, and I discovered, transgender pornography. And it started this lifelong cross-dressing fetishism. And this is very common in the trans community. If you go on these communities and you type in the question, am I trans or is it just a fetish? You'll see that the trans feminine community acknowledges that the vast majority of men today who struggle with their gender identity, prior to their trans identification, prior to their egg cracking, they struggle with this question, am I trans or is it just a fetish? And the modern ideology is pushing this idea that no, it's not just a fetish. You're actually a woman on the inside, you're trans. And so you couple this extreme sex addiction, this pornographic dopamine addiction, this addiction to the euphoria. And then you couple that with these gender ideological movements, grooming men down this pathway. This egg culture where these men who don't really have a lot of dysphoria, they don't have a lot of they're like neutral on being a man. Again, they don't have this severe anatomical dysphoria, but they're being groomed down this pathway, largely inspired by these super stimulating pornographic environments that are just melting men's brains. You have, porn culture today is very different than it was 20, 30 years ago. You have, edging and gooning and all these things where it's just causes massive dopamine surges in the brain. And this causes addiction, rapid onset addiction. And this is what's driving men down this pathway. This is why we see a proliferation of men who are transitioning today. Now, I know I'm going to get comments on here saying, well, that wasn't my experience. I didn't experience that. Well, okay, great. Maybe there are exceptions to this. I'm sure there are. There's lots of etiologies, pathways, causal pathways into trans identity. But I'm talking about a very specific cohort. This is a large cohort. It may even be the majority of modern men taking on the trans identity today. It starts off with cross-dressing kink, femboy kink, all this degenerate grooming culture and sissy hypnosis and cross-dressing and all these things. You have this modern internet environment, and it's really causing a tremendous amount of harm to these men. They are getting addicted to this euphoria, this pleasure, this intense rush that they get from cross-dressing and looking at all this transgender pornography, and it's breaking men's brains. I'm telling you, this is a real thing. I have seen it over and over and over. I experienced it in my own life. And this is very insidious, and people don't talk about this. This is a huge crisis today. And you see, and it's getting worse. You're starting to see with the AI technology is making it worse. You're getting these men lost, with AI girlfriends and just gooning all day. And it just gets sucked into this stuff. And you have OnlyFans creators. So many trans influencers have an OnlyFans account. The connection between pornography and OnlyFans and transgenderism and the modern transgender cohort is very common. And you see this proliferation of, being like BDSM lifestyles and being pro kink and all this stuff. This is very common in these communities. Look at communities on Reddit and 4chan. There's a level of degeneracy there that is just unprecedented. And I'm telling you, this dopamine addiction is the primary cause of how the paraphilia escalates, because you need a bigger and bigger hit. You need more and more euphoria. You're chasing the dragon of gender euphoria. This is why the trans community talks about euphoria boners so much. So guys, this is a real problem. And I've been trying to talk about this on my channel for a long time. And I get a lot of people very dismissive saying that, porn addiction is not a real thing. That's just like made up by these religious conservatives and stuff like this. But no, there's a lot of research on this. This is a real thing. Sex addiction is a real thing. Porn addiction is a real thing. And being addicted to transgenderism really is a real thing. And this is causing rapid onset gender dysphoria in men. This is why men who have gone their entire lives, being pretty regular guys, and that they're married and father children and all these things, and then suddenly they transition out of nowhere. They like suddenly, this is the Chris Tyson phenomenon, where these men are transitioning out of nowhere, getting gender dysphoria out of nowhere. Well, it's caused by this escalation of the paraphilia. It's caused by this modern super stimulus. The modern environment of transgenderism is a massive super stimulus, and it's literally rewiring the brains of these men. And it's just causing so much destruction. It's destroying families. It's destroying men's lives. It's destroying their dignity. And they're getting sucked up into this. And so I've tried to be really honest about my own personal experience, because people will say that, like, oh, you're just projecting. Just because that's what you experienced, just because you had a fetish doesn't mean that everyone else does. Well, yeah, true. That there's lots of trans women who don't share my experience, but I'm telling you, I've been researching this community. I've been involved in this community for many, many, many years. And this is a definite large cohort. And in my opinion, this constitutes the majority of the cohort, which is why almost the majority of trans women relate to the question, am I trans or is it just a fetish? And 40 years ago, if you had this fetish, it would have never escalated to full-blown transition. It would have never escalated to, rapid onset gender dysphoria to the point that you want to blow up your life. People would just learn to cope with this. It wouldn't escalate because it did not have that addiction element. It didn't have that massive dopamine rush. You were able to regulate this. You were able to keep it under control. You were able to compartmentalize. Whereas now, it's just melting people's brains, and it's causing them to just go down this pathway suddenly, out of the blue. And you started to see this in the early 2000s. And the other factor here, in terms of risk factor, in terms of modern technology causing addiction, is you have to look at gaming. Modern gaming is incredibly addictive. So many men are addicted to video games these days. And it's not a coincidence that a lot of trans women, you ask them, what was the sign that, you were a girl all along? Well, they'll say things like, I always liked to play a girl in video games. A lot of these trans women are, video gamers and nerds and all this stuff. And so and that gaming and pornography have caused a modern crisis of addiction in the population of young men. And this is responsible for the modern crisis of transgenderism in our society. And this is a very serious problem, and we need to address it head on. We need to talk about this. And so, that's all I have to say for this video. I mean, I have so many videos on my YouTube channel detailing this, talking about this, exploring the seedy underbelly of these, online communities of trans feminine individuals. And it's really a dark thing. This is a very dark thing, a dark pathway that our society is going down. And it's very scary. And I honestly don't really see a huge solution to it, other than a complete restructuring of the values in our society, which is why I've talked a lot recently on my channel about this crisis requires a spiritual solution, because there's a reason why the 12-step program has been so popular within the addiction recovery community, amongst alcohol addicts, drug addicts, porn addicts, sex addicts, all this stuff, because they recognize that there's a spiritual issue here, recognizing that you're powerless to this and you need to turn yourself over to the higher power. So that's what we need in the society. We need a recognition of the higher power. And I'm not going to get all preachy in this video, but I have personally found that the thing that has healed me of my addictions, my lust addictions, my pornography addictions, all these things, it is Jesus, it is spirituality. Okay, I'm getting a little preachy. Sorry about that. But yeah, I'm just sharing what's worked for me. And this is really a spiritual issue, because this crisis of hedonism and pleasure seeking and novelty and pornography and all this stuff, it is a big problem in our society. So, okay, well, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. Take care and God bless. Bye-bye.